Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. Amy, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here.
So I know I love talking with young nonprofits and really trying to get them to start to think like a for-profit business. And I know what you do with the nonprofits that you work with, and you work with some of the largest nonprofits in the world. And you teach this framework called the Nonprofit Life Cycle Framework. And I feel like every for-profit business needs some type of a framework to kind of anticipate kind of where they're going, where they've been, and really kind of put a plan in place to help them grow and achieve the next level of goals that they set for themselves. So I really want to dive in with just my first question of how do you define, what the framework, the nonprofit life cycle framework is to you, and why is it important to the companies that you work with?
Yeah, you bet. Well, the nonprofit life cycle framework, I think, is one of those fundamental frameworks that I wish every nonprofit leader and board member knew about and used in their daily, work at their organizations. So that's how important I think it is, I guess, is to emphasize that. And so really what I think people need to know in a nutshell is that the nonprofit life cycle framework is predictable stages of growth that all nonprofits go through, from startup to kind of a growing phase to maturity and sometimes to decline. And that each of those stages comes with unique challenges and priorities, and especially around fundraising, but it's not limited. It's across the organization, from programs to infrastructure, even to board development. And so what's great about it, and why I think it's so powerful for organizations and boards to embrace, is that it normalizes what's happening and it gives you a roadmap and almost a way to see around the corner of what's coming. And so when an organization is small and growing, it can feel daunting to think about how to go from where you are to really where you want to be and the impact that you want to make. And so just like, I have a teen that lives in my house, and just like he looks like a grown person, right, on the outside, but on the inside, there's a lot going on that isn't really well developed. I don't know if anybody else can relate to that or even think about themselves, when they were a teen. But it's a little bit like that, where we can have things that are going really well in our organization and are really well developed, but other places where we're still growing and still maturing. And that's the same with nonprofit organizations and really any organization, to your point. And it helps us make decisions. It helps us depersonalize. It's not about the people, but it's about the shared, and predictable problems that this stage is presenting for each of us.
And I know a lot of the clients that you work with are more established nonprofits. At what stage of a nonprofit's growth cycle do you think this framework would be great to start implementing it in?
Oh, I think every organization at any stage can benefit from this understanding. And in some ways, I think that the earlier stage organizations have the most to gain from understanding and embracing the concepts in the life cycle model. Because when you are in that early stage, it can feel like you want to do all the things now. And board members, especially who are leading those organizations, either sometimes they're professionally working in much larger, more mature organizations, or maybe they've been board members of mature organizations, or maybe they're just curious and engaged board members who are paying attention to what other organizations are doing, maybe their alma mater or other nonprofits that they see doing different things in the community. And they'll come with lots of ideas about what you should be doing. And so it helps you, I think, especially when you're small, to decrease the overwhelm and to focus in on the right things for your stage. The way I like to think about it is, it might not be the wrong thing. It just might be the wrong thing at this time. And I think that's even more important for the smaller, lower capacity in terms of staff capacity organizations to really prioritize their time. They have less of it and they have less staff. And so I think arguably it's more important for them to be really strategic about how they use that time and the strategies that they're using. Then, maybe the bigger organizations can get away with a little bit more because they have more people to do more things.
Well, and just having a framework, even in for-profit businesses, is just a great roadmap of kind of what to do next to almost guarantee success, right? You can never guarantee success, but it's kind of one of those things where you don't know what you don't know, and a framework helps to lay out the path for you, so that if you just follow these steps, the end result should be growth, right? And I definitely like your idea of anybody at any stage should be implementing this framework, because it's actually, I think, easier for smaller nonprofits to implement a framework and have better success than the bigger nonprofits, because the bigger nonprofits have more employees, they have more people in the way, they have bigger board members, and I think just the time it takes to just implement simple things when you're a larger organization just delays it. Not that they're never going to get to it. It takes longer to get approved. But when you're a smaller nonprofit with just, the founder and maybe a few volunteers and maybe a couple of employees, you can really hit the ground running and implement a lot of this stuff and see quick success right away.
I couldn't agree more. I think, sometimes, when I'm coaching leaders at small organizations or working with boards at small organizations, as opposed to doing the big fundraising initiatives at the big organizations that my team and I work with, I always remind those leaders at the smaller organizations that they can crush things in ways that the big guys really struggle with. And, a simple example of that, just for a minute here, is at this sort of fundraising, sort of startup or early stage organization level, that's a place where donor stewardship, making donors feel really appreciated, they can completely blow the big guys out of the water. Because if they have, let's say 100 supporters, they can create an incredibly high touch experience with 100 people, versus the thousands or tens of thousands of people that the large guys, it seems amazing to have like that kind of donor base, but you have to you give up something, right? Like a few people in those larger organizations have a high touch experience, but the vast majority of us don't, right? Mm-hmm. We get the letter, right? And so that's where the smaller organizations, that's a good example of applying a life cycle framework, is that when we're small, we can crush donor stewardship. That's a strength of ours, actually, not a challenge for us.
So let's start to unpack the framework a little bit. What are the different, stages in the life cycle that, nonprofits can that are listening right now, can start to decide, okay, this is the stage I'm currently in, and, what can I do next?
Yes. Well, there's a couple of different life cycle models. If you go to, Google after this, or you go to my website and download the free resource, or if you just throw it in ChatGPT and ask, here's what my nonprofit's like, which stage am I at? You're going to come up, with a couple different models out there, but they're all sort of speaking the same language. And so just to simplify it, let's just stick to 4, right? Startup, growth, maturity, and decline. And so, those would be kind of the big buckets. Again, some might have 6, might have, 7, whatever, but the gist is all the same. And so in startup, that's where you're really building and you're trying to establish that there's a need for you in the marketplace, and that you can exist. Oftentimes you're an organization that is all volunteer led. You don't have professional, paid staff yet, and you have volunteers who are running the organization. Then when you move into growth, you've sort of established, yep, there's a need. There's something here that people are responding to and our community is responding to and needs. And we have a way to, you're trying to figure out a way to support the organization financially. So growth is really looking at where are our revenue sources going to come from? How are we going to move from all volunteer to some way of having it be a sustainable, functional business that's not just a hobby or like a passion project for somebody. And so you're really looking at how do we build and what are the revenue streams for us. Then when you move into maturity, you're looking at scaling and how do we build off of that kind of early success that we've had in terms of the revenue. Oftentimes moving from growth to maturity means that you're having to rethink some of your revenue strategies. Most of the time organizations start from startup into growth by using fundraising, just, from individuals, kind of grassroots fundraising as a way to establish that revenue source. But moving from growth to maturity often means you're building a more diverse set of revenue streams, whether that's from individuals, yes, maybe it's from foundations that's still philanthropic, but it also could mean from other kinds of earned income strategies or contracts with public entities. There's a wide range of things that can look like. And then decline is where it seems like your relevance is, maybe wavering in the marketplace, that for whatever reason, the market is not meeting or has evolved or changed in some way, that those revenue streams have broken down for some reason. And you're needing to reassess, what is our mission? Is this still needed? And if so, how do we reimagine the way that we fund ourselves?
And when you're working with a new nonprofit, what's kind of the first thing that you guys identify? Is it just identifying what stage they're currently in and then, figuring out, putting the plan together from there? Or is there something else that when you first sit down with them, this is the first thing we need to identify if we want to have success with this framework?
Yeah. So a lot of times organizations that are coming to me are looking to grow in some way, makes sense. I want to grow our fundraising or grow our impact. And so one of the things I like to, probably the first thing that I try to, kind of discern, either I ask directly or I try to kind of get at, is this a fundraising problem or a revenue problem?
Unpack both of those, because I don't think a lot of people understand that. Because a lot of people think fundraising is revenue, but it's not, right? So unpack both of those, because I think that's very important.
Yes. So, so when nonprofits are, what's that old saying? It's like nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model, right? I think probably lots of people have heard that. And so what that means is that nonprofits have all sorts of ways to resource themselves, to fund themselves. And philanthropy, which, again, simple, individuals, corporate, and foundations, those are just one option for growing your revenue or to have revenue streams. And in fact, Heather McLeod Grant, she's an iconic kind of researcher in this space. Her work has shown that national average is that around 10% or less of nonprofits that are sustainable, 10% or less of their annual revenue is coming from philanthropic sources, which can kind of blow people away. And then Heather's research has shown that organizations that scale never do it on the back of philanthropy. They do it on other revenue sources. So when an organization is small, and I think this is really important for your audience and for small nonprofits, it's totally understandable when you have an idea, you see a need, and you want to meet that need. that you try to get that off the ground as quick as you possibly can. And so the quickest way to get it off the ground is to do grassroots fundraising from individual people, right? Whether that's in kind, like we're going to get backpacks, everybody bring a backpack, right? Or it's we're going to get backpacks to people, and each backpack's like $50. Would anybody give us $50, right? That is the easiest way to get it off the ground. But once you figure out that, yep, backpacks are needed, right? There's a market need. Then you have to figure out, if we want to grow, knowing what I just said is essential for the founder and the leaders and the board members to think more broadly about how we scale. How are we going to go from, 20 backpacks at this school to backpacks across our community? And is fundraising the best strategy to do that, to grow our organization? And what are the other revenue sources that we might be able to tap into? And it can kind of blow people's minds sometimes when we're talking about just this, where it's like, what do you mean? There's other revenue sources? Nonprofits fund themselves, by things that aren't, just fundraising. But when
just a simple donation.
Yeah, when we stop to think about it, everybody knows. It's just that, I always tell board members, this stuff, you just got to flip the switch to remembering that you know it. Yep. So when we think about, if any of us went to, we think about a college, right? Like a private college, like pick whatever private college. Let's pick Stanford because, let's just pick on them for whatever reason. They're a nonprofit, right? They're a giant nonprofit, but they're not funded primarily through philanthropy. Yeah, they got some big fancy people that gave them a bunch of money that had their names on buildings. That's philanthropy. Good for them. But the vast majority of their revenue is coming from tuition. That's fee for service. We're paying you tuition to get me this, degree. Think about, if anybody's adopted a dog at, like the Humane Society. We paid a fee, maybe not a big fee, but $100, or $300 to, when we got our dog. That's a fee for service. They also fundraise, but that's, those are just simple examples. When we really start to think about nonprofits, either on a small way or the large scale, we can think, oh yeah, right. Like there's fee for service is a big component of things, not just philanthropy. So when we're trying to grow, the question is, do we have a fundraising problem or do we have a revenue problem? And if it's that we need more money, which is usually the problem, that's a revenue problem. And fundraising might be a part of the answer, but it's usually not the whole answer.
And when you're talking about the different stages and trying to identify which stage the nonprofit's currently in, are there any, common pitfalls that they could fall into if they don't pick the right one at the right time and maybe try to be too ambitious too early?
Yeah. Well, before I answer that, I think it's really important to say kind of one of the unique features of nonprofit life cycle stage framework, which is not, while an organization might generally be in a stage, what is also true is that, and really important, and, whenever I talk about this with leaders or boards, it always is like the kind of awkward laughing. So like, oh my gosh, this is so relatable. Not every piece of your organization is at the same stage at the same time. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that's also really important to, I think, talk about and acknowledge when we're talking about this topic. So typically nonprofits are mission centered. And so their programs get way out ahead of their kind of administrative functions and their operational functions. And so the programs can be incredibly well run, incredibly well, staffed. And then, their finance, their fundraising, their kind of operational systems can be lagging. That would be a very typical pattern of kind of evolution for an organization. And so that's, I think, important to acknowledge. So when we're talking about, what stage am I in, I think it's also, it's harder. It's helpful to think about, well, which part of the organization are we talking about? Because the answer is oftentimes different depending on each piece of the organization.
Well, and that's one of the things that a lot of people I just don't think about. They just say, "Hey, I want to grow, I want to make more money, for our organization." But the entire organization almost needs to be ready for that, for the different things that you're going to be implementing. Just like you just said, it's like, well, you could have an employee problem where you don't have enough volunteers, enough employees to be able to put this initiative together, to be able to raise the kind of money that you want to raise. And you're almost setting yourself up for failure, right off the bat.
Right. So the big fundraising projects that our team works on are big capital campaigns or big growth initiative projects. And so one of the, we do an assessment process and a readiness, process to help organizations figure out, how to be successful in achieving their goals around that. And, we don't have a cookie cutter approach, Tom, right? We do this every time uniquely. However, there's some themes that I would say every single report, we basically have a common finding. It's tailored, but the shared finding is you need more capacity. So what we almost universally find is, hey, once you've gotten past startup and you're in that mature place, you have a donor base. And hey, there's donors in there that have a lot more money to give than they're currently giving to you. That's not the problem. The problem is you don't have the people power or the infrastructure to harness what is in there. And therefore, we need to help you build that in order to achieve your goals.
Yeah, well, I also think about right there was pure gold, because that's probably the one thing that I see younger nonprofits, or I guess early stage nonprofits, neglecting, is the going back to the donors that they already have. They're constantly looking at, like, oh, I got to get new donors, new donors, new donors. It's like you have a whole base of 100 or 200 donors that you should be tapping into whenever you can, right? It's easier to ask them for a second donation than to try to ask someone for their first donation. And so,
sorry to interrupt you. You know what I call that? I've done this so long that I've got these little things that little sayings. I call that addiction to acquisition.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like people just don't think that, hey, I could be putting together a whole system to just retarget our current donors than trying to, go after new donors. And so let me ask you this question, because I don't think people quite understand this, is, you work with these nonprofits to implement this plan to be able to unlock, extra, either the resources or the financing, the revenue, the donations. What is kind of, if a young nonprofit looks at it like, hey, I'm going to have to make an investment into hiring a company, a person, a coach to help put this in place for me, or teach me how to do, tell me what I don't know so that I now know. What is probably the quickest ROI that they can get, or what is that ROI timeframe? And, how many people are just not thinking about, like, hey, I have to invest in somebody else to help grow my business. But if I do that, then my business will explode, right? Or my organization will explode.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. You have to have the resources to pay somebody, right? So it can be a little bit of a chicken and the egg. I don't want to minimize the reality that so many of these organizations are living with. And so that's why, frankly, why I think it's amazing what you're doing. It's why I have free resources on my website, is because there's a lot out there, that's free, that you can teach yourself through. And you can learn, you don't have to pay, you're not paying me right now, right? Or you right now, you don't have to give me your email address to download stuff off my website. It's just there. And there's a lot out there like that from a lot of wonderful people. So I would say, if you're in a situation where, like, legitimately you don't have the resources, it doesn't mean you can't be successful. I think one of the biggest, flexes in life is that we learn how to teach ourselves things, and that's a big part of being entrepreneurial. When you're starting a nonprofit, you're very entrepreneurial. And one of the main drivers of success being entrepreneurial is teaching yourself stuff. And so there's a lot out there. So if you're like, we're not in a position, doesn't mean you're screwed. It just means I got to teach myself. And that's a superpower that you probably have within you if you're somebody who started a nonprofit. So I'd say go to the web and teach yourself stuff, around this.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
I just think like, a nonprofit founder is an entrepreneur. They're a business owner. It's a nonprofit business, but it's a business. You still have to put in the work. Like, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, they all, when they first started out, they didn't know what they were doing, but they had to learn it. And you learn it by, watching other people, what they do, reading the books that you need to read, and just kind of hiring the consultants to come in and fix this one portion of their business. But every big business and every business owner out there, successful business person, started out not knowing anything. And
Yeah.
I think you just have to go into the nonprofit space as a founder, thinking like, hey, this is great, I get to help people, and that's all I'm going to do is take in some donations here and then give it over here. But really, you need to be able to hold on to money, have a runway, and invest it back into knowledge and teaching for yourself and your team, so that you can scale and grow the organization faster, if you want to have that big impact in the world.
I agree. And I think, to circle back to your question, I think that sometimes whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit or whatever kind of business, the attraction to scaling quickly is a mistake. I think oftentimes you need to take a more measured approach to growth, or even stay at a stable size in order to build your infrastructure and your capacity. And that, I think, is something that takes some discipline, frankly, because the pressure out there, either from inside of you or from your board members, or just what you think you quote unquote should do, or even, with nonprofits, it's the need, right? Like there is such a need out there. And so that can feel like a pressure. But it takes some discipline and a way of thinking to say, you know what, we're gonna invest in ourselves. And again, I don't want to, not acknowledge the challenges around that. I get it. Donors and foundations have often been like, I want the new shiny program. And so you feel like you have to chase this like growth thing to attract, funding. But the reality is I think that's shifting. I don't think it's like completely shifted, but I think there has been a growing consciousness among foundations, specifically, that are really understanding capacity, and building and investing in capacity building. And I think that's a wonderful evolution. I hope more, embrace that way of thinking.
So I like to talk or ask this question as our last question of the day, and then we're going to learn more about how people can get some of these free resources from you, and where they can connect with you. But you've worked with a lot of organizations of all sizes over the years. What is probably one of the most common mistakes that you see some of them making when selecting either fundraising strategies or implementing a framework, or anything like that they can avoid today, that would be an easy first step to avoid, that will kind of put them on the right path to success?
Yeah, great question. I think trying to do what it seems like the big organizations are doing, like let's build an endowment, when you are actually needing to build a donor base, right? Building an endowment is not a bad idea in general. Like it's not a bad thing, but it might not be the right thing for you right now. And so I think that's the thing that I would just offer as, a takeaway, a practical takeaway, is to look over your fundraising plan. And I guess that would be the biggest takeaway. There's a huge amount of research that shows if you have a written annual fundraising plan, not one just up in your head, like I got a plan, right? But an actual written fundraising plan, you will raise more money. So assuming you have one, if you don't, get one, and then look it over and ask yourself, are these fundraising strategies the right things for us at this stage? And if they're not, what are those right things that we should be doing? Building our base. Maybe events are a great strategy to build your base. But if you're at a larger organization, it's like, well, maybe events served a great need. We're working with an organization right now where events were a big strategy for them to grow. But now they need to move into just asking people directly, for major gifts. And events isn't the cornerstone of what they should be doing anymore. So that's an example of, this was a great strategy, but now we're at a different stage. So look at that fundraising plan that you have and ask yourself, well, what stage are we in? And does this still make sense for that stage? And evolve your strategies to be more connected to that stage.
Yeah, I love that. And so how can people get into your world? I know you mentioned free resources, and I know in the description we've given away some, and we had some links for them to get those free resources. But how else, if they wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah. thevargagroup.com is the website, and there's a kind of a tab at the top that says resources. And I'm really committed to understanding not everybody is in a position to hire myself or my team. So you just get to go on there, search around, and click and download. So that's a great way. And then people also seem to love all that I share on LinkedIn. And so I would say find me on there. I don't have a company LinkedIn. I just have me. So just look up Amy Varga. And I'm a big sucker, Tom. It's probably something I need to evolve from my stage. I'm a big sucker for responding to people. So if you send me a message from LinkedIn, I will personally respond to you, which frankly is kind of like at an earlier stage, right? Like for me, but that's really important to me. So you can find me on there and follow me, but you can also reach out to me that way, and I will personally write you back.
That is great. And we're going to make sure to include your LinkedIn direct link for everybody in the description. So please go ahead and follow Amy and learn more about the life cycle framework to help your nonprofit grow. Amy, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. This has been wonderful.
Awesome. Well, I love what you do, and thanks for all that you're putting out in the world.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.